Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on expert Q&A on the integration of Razor's Edge and Salesforce. We'll be starting off today with a short presentation from Heller Consulting and Omatic Software, and then opening up the floor to your questions. Please put your questions in the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel so we can see them and we'll answer them as they come in. If we don't get to your question in this presentation today, we'll follow up with you directly afterwards. We will be recording this session, and we'll email a link to the recording and slides afterwards. Sandy, why don't you get us started?
Great. Thank you very much, Brian, and welcome, everyone. We've got today, as he mentioned, this is an expert Q&A session, so we're excited after a brief presentation to get to some of your questions about using Razor's Edge and Salesforce together and integration, integrating data between the two. We'll start with a little introduction of our presenters and our companies. My name is Sandy Renardi, and I am an account executive with Heller Consulting. I've been with the firm about 10 years with a little over 2 stints. I started out with doing front-end consulting on Razor's Edge and worked through various roles, including customization, integration, spec and management, development and management, along with some solution engineering and sales work. And in between there, I worked for the University of Wisconsin for 3 years as we implemented Blackbaud CRM for a full set solution at the university. And I'm happy to be back at Heller and working with the nonprofit sector again.
Hi everyone, my name's Jennifer Thal. I'm a senior consultant here at Heller. I've been with Heller about 3.5 years or so. As a senior consultant, I'm usually playing the lead role on both strategy projects and implementation projects with our clients. So talking through whether to integrate systems and how to integrate systems, and then implementing those integrations is a big part of the work that I do here. So I'm eager to hear your questions.
Hi everyone, my name is Sherry Carver and I am with Omatic Software. I am the consulting manager for professional services. I've been with Omatic Software now just over 3 years and have worked in a senior consultant capacity as well as management capacity, primarily focusing on implementing our products such as Informatic, List Management, and Segmentomatic, but several others. We have quite the laundry list, and also work with our migration projects. So we work to migrate clients from Razor's Edge to Razor's Edge and other systems as well. So we develop that entire process and do the migration work ourselves as well. I came directly from Blackbaud, where I was there for 7.5 years. I worked in a senior consultant capacity there and also as a trainer. And prior to all of that consulting life, I also worked in some nonprofit organizations in several capacities in Charleston, South Carolina, where we are currently based. And I look forward to hearing your questions, and I'll pass it on to Stu.
Thanks, Sherry. I'm Stu Manowith. I'm the Director of Professional Services at Omatic Software. Professional Services is another name for our implementation consulting practice. It's the team of people that implement Omatic products as well as provide consulting support, generally speaking, within the Blackbaud ecosystem. Prior to Omatic, like Sherry, I served time at Blackbaud. I was at Blackbaud for 13 years, working on the Razor's Edge and the Financial Edge, and later Blackbaud CRM. Prior to that, I was Director of Development at 2 nonprofits in the St. Louis area. I'll pass it over to Shane.
Thanks, Stu. Shane Norris, I'm the Director of Product Development at Omatic. I've been here almost 7 years. Work with our team of developers and QA along with our product management to build the products such as Informatic and the connectors that we're talking about today. So I look forward to your questions. As like Stu and Sherry, was Blackbaud several years ago, both in product development and professional services, so we all have a wealth of knowledge on that side.
Great, thanks so much. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about Heller Consulting. We are a firm of about 35 people who work exclusively with nonprofits. We've worked with 1,500 clients on over 3,000 projects, and we've got people kind of sprinkled around the country with offices in San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Boston, and Austin. And the work that we do is we work with nonprofit organizations to help them use technology not only to be more efficient, but to be more effective at carrying out their mission. We do this through services ranging from strategic technology planning and CRM roadmap development through implementation and user adoption guidance. Can you advance the slide, please? And this one covers, and this one just covers a couple of the things that we feature with strategic planning, technology planning, implementation, and fundraising and engagement, team alignment, change management. Great. So we'll turn it over to Omatic for an introduction on your company.
Great, thank you. I will be brief because I know we want to spend as much time as possible on the Q&A. So Omatic was started as a software company. It grew out of the Blackbaud ecosystem in about 2002 and became a Blackbaud technology partner in 2004. We are about 51 people that come from development background, both fundraising development and IT development. Those mean two different things depending on who you're talking to, which I learned as a former working with the latter. As well as people who are deeply experienced in the nonprofit industry, and as is evidenced by our panelists today, a lot of us worked at Blackbaud before working at Omatic. Can you advance the slide, please? As I said, we started out as a software company, and so much of the work that we do is developing products for nonprofit organizations to use in marrying up different systems within the Blackbaud ecosystem to systems outside the Blackbaud ecosystem, such as Salesforce. And in recent years, in maybe the last 8 or 10 years, we've developed a strong professional services practice focused on working on Omatic products as well as other products within the Blackbaud ecosystem. And can you advance the slide? Thank you. Here are, this is a list of the Omatic product suite with, I would say that most of the people in the session right now are familiar or at least have heard of Import-O-Matic, as well as some of the other products that Sherry mentioned during her introduction. Segment-O-Matic, which is used for helping do more than Razor's Edge can do out of the box in the area of direct marketing. Merge-O-Matic for duplicate tracking and duplicate mitigation. Score-O-Matic for affinity scoring, etc. Post-O-Matic for posting to your general ledger. The newest member of the family is right in the middle there, Retrace, which is kind of a super-duper auditing function for figuring out who changed records, who did what to which records, and determining how those need to be mitigated, if at all. And certainly, you can find out more about Omatic by going to omaticsoftware.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Stu. And I just have to say that stuff all is so cool, and yeah, it's a great list of items and tools. So for the agenda today, we're just going to talk briefly a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's changed in the technology industry as well as the nonprofit sector, about why are we here today to talk about integrating Razor's Edge and Salesforce. And then Omatic is going to share with us a case study review from one of their clients and to talk about integration considerations from a real tactical standpoint, which is their expertise. And then from there, we'll get right into the Q&A. So, let me advance the slide. There we go. So this is my totally non-scientific fish diagram that I'm using just to map out what we see as what we've been seeing with our clients as a real shift in the approach that they're taking to the task of building out a technology environment that works well for them. We've seen a shift back in the early to mid 2000s, and especially when Salesforce kind of made a big splash into the scene in the nonprofit sector. People started to really think, like, can we have a single CRM system that'll give us a 360-degree view of our constituents, from donors to volunteers to event attendees to people that receive services and are beneficiaries of whatever our mission might be to carry out. Could we get this all in one system, and wouldn't that be amazing to not have to deal with all this other stuff? And people really went in that direction for a while, and we've seen, and I think what happened is after a bit, we've all seen like, that might be too big of an ask, that there's different kinds of details that are needed from a fundraising solution than are needed from other types of work that you might be doing. And so it might just be asking a little bit too much of one system. And that's okay. People have learned a lot, and the software vendors have learned a lot in the same time, I think, as well. But we're kind of starting to shift back. The other thing that's happened, and I'll talk about this in a moment, is that the technology has changed and become, there's been a lot of evolution, a lot of development, and a lot better. It's a much more competitive market today for nonprofits than it was before. And this has allowed people to start thinking more back toward best of breed. Can I have different solutions for the different things that we need to do, and get that data married together so that it's not super inefficient? Is this a reality? And we're seeing people go a lot more in that direction these days than we were, 6, 7, 8, 10 years ago. And so this brings us to the next slide, please. That what's changed particularly with integration is that it has actually gotten easier. There's better, more affordable technology. That list of products that Omatic has developed, as I mentioned, those things are all tools that help to keep this data clean, intact, moving, handled, and makes it manageable to do those. There's lots of tools like that. The other is the workforce is now better equipped to manage that. When I started out consulting and working in nonprofits in the late 90s, early 2000s, when Razor's Edge 7 came out, nobody knew how to really maximize it and how to use it. Fast forward to now, there's tons of people familiar with the Blackbaud ecosystem, and so it's much easier to hire and to engage with companies like Omatic for services that you might need around those systems. So there's much more there. On the Salesforce side of things, their entire ecosystem, their model is designed around having people all over the world certified and part of their community with lots of learning opportunities and other things. So you can hire both outsourced or in-house staff who are certified and can handle some of the requirements of managing integrations more easily than you used to. And one last note on this slide is just that we did say it's easier. We've talked about it in both, between everybody on the call here, I think, has agreed that we don't like to go around saying that integration is easy, just because we don't want to set the expectation that it's still, at the end of the day, there's still human beings who are contributing the data that's part of these integrations, and there'll always be certain things that we have to handle and account for, but it is easier than it's ever been, and I think very reasonable and manageable today. Next slide. So the big opportunities here are, by integrating Razor's Edge and Salesforce, is that you can improve both your efficiency and your effectiveness. Razor's Edge fundraising tools may work well for your organization. You may not see that there's a really good alternate option for you. There might be, but that at the same time, Salesforce may offer to cover some gaps that you're not able to do with Razor's Edge, particularly in the program management, some marketing areas, other things that Razor's Edge isn't designed to do. It also allows you to so integrating allows you in that scenario to maintain efficiency with your demographic information, so you're not doing duplicate entry, and which keeps you able to utilize your systems more effectively. You're not focused on that grunt work. Instead, you're able to really dig into the real work at hand. And then over time, you're able to utilize that data to develop useful insights into your constituent base to keep improving on that work. Next slide. That being said, the big thing is, one of the things we always say is that careful planning is really key to pursuing integration of any of your systems or any technology project, really. And with regard to integration, it's really important to start with the big picture. What goals are you going to be able to achieve? What is it that you, as an organization, as a whole, is going to improve for you, or is integrating going to allow you to do. You should always be able to answer the question of, by having this data integrated, I will blank. I'll be able to do X, Y, or Z, and have that real specific action item in mind. Be honest about what does not need to go in both systems. Don't just throw it all in, and because you're going to end up with some clutter and a lot more to manage. So you do want to be strategic and realistic about what you're going to use. And then also culturally, thinking about and talking through how different departments who use each system are going to work together when they have a shared stake in the data. That changes things for people sometimes. If there's any territorialness or competitiveness or whatever it might be, those things have to kind of be accounted for when you're making a change like this, to just make sure that everybody's on board and looking toward the organization's best interest as a whole. So those are just some of our high-level thoughts that we wanted to share today before we get into the Q&A, and I'll turn it over to the Omatic team to talk about their case study.
Great. Thank you very much. I'll call this more of a user story than a case study, and I'll be brief. So earlier in the year, beginning of this year, Omatic introduced an import-o-matic connector for Salesforce, and one of our early clients, one of our earlier clients that took advantage of that connector, actually was what I would call a textbook case of the benefits of having the systems talk to each other. It was a faith-based organization, a fraternal organization that fundraised nationally, but that had chapters or interest groups all over the country. And the client was using Razor's Edge for fundraising, and they were using Salesforce to manage their members and their chapters and chapter group leadership and marketing to those who might be interested in chapter activities and in furthering the mission of the organization. It was clear to them that they had people who were donors that were very much invested in the mission of the organization, but that were not involved in chapter activities, as well as that they had chapter members and chapter leaders who obviously were physically and emotionally invested in the organization and had never been really cultivated as donors. And so it was pretty, I want to say it was almost a no-brainer that the constituents in both systems should be meshed so that those who are donors could be cultivated to join the discussion groups and the chapters, and that those who are already in the discussion groups and the chapters could be cultivated as donors. And so again, a fairly straightforward example and a fairly simple example, but that is foundationally what we see in working with organizations that use both Razor's Edge and Salesforce, is that there are opportunities for people who are in Razor's Edge to constituents that are in the Razor's Edge system to be taken advantage of for what the organization is using Salesforce for, and vice versa. I know that we're going to have questions toward the end of the session, but I think right now I'll turn it over to Sherry. Sherry's team actually is the team in Omatic that works with our clients that use both systems. And so I'm going to ask her to talk about some more operational points to think about when we talk about interfacing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Stu. And if we could just go ahead and advance to the next slide, that'd be great. Thank you. So with any integration, we always have considerations to take into account whenever we're looking at utilizing, obviously, multiple products and potentially even a product to help us integrate as well. So one thing I do want to point out, as Stu mentioned in his client example, is that our client was using our Salesforce connector. And some of you may not be very familiar with that. At Omatic, we have developed a series of connectors over the past few years that help clients to integrate their data. So we actually use Omatic, our primary product, as a foundation, and we build connectors on top of that foundation for specific products, which allows us to integrate that data with a lot more hands-off, a lot less interaction from clients, and it also helps the data to be bidirectional as well. So I want to give you a little bit of background on that because it goes very much into our key points of integrating this data and things to consider. And primarily one of the things that we have to have questions around quite often when we're talking about this integration is which is going to be the system of record. And the system of record we typically look at as the one that is going to be most frequently updated with the contact information, the most up-to-date emails, most up-to-date addresses, or biographical information, names. So typically we have a system that's going to be a little bit more frequently updated than one or the other, and that helps us to understand kind of more what's the primary, where that information lies more frequently. That may not be so cut and dry, but we try to find a way for us to be able to do that so that as we go forward and we're talking about integrating this data, it's a little bit easier for us to understand kind of what all needs to integrate, how frequently maybe it needs to integrate. And I'll talk about that more in just a second. So there is also another consideration, which is the constituent record structure between Raiser's Edge and Salesforce. So obviously they are two different systems and they are structured very differently. Depending on how you structure Salesforce, there may be a different connection with your record types. So it could be that you potentially have accounts set up to connect to constituent records, or you may develop accounts to be more household records and the contacts are going to be more constituent relationship records. So that's a very big understanding that we need to have between those two systems as we integrate them together so that we do have a successful integration. And within those records, we also want to talk about what specific data will flow between the systems. So depending on how we're utilizing Salesforce, there could be some data that maybe just needs to come to Salesforce to live within Raiser's Edge. Or it could be that we do need data to come in from Salesforce and also go back into Salesforce from Raiser's Edge. So understanding that flow, if there will be a bidirectional flow, there may be only one direction in some scenarios. We need to, of course, understand what's going to work best for the organization. And again, achieving some of those action items that earlier that Heller spoke about and referencing these are the things that I can achieve, that will, of course, help us in understanding that flow of data. One big thing that we find quite often in integrating systems is also looking at how both systems are set up and potentially looking at auditing both of those systems. We know that not every database is perfect as much as we want it to be, so there are sometimes needs for us to audit the system to understand them a little bit better. There may be custom fields that we've developed within Salesforce or attributes within Raiser's Edge that we need to understand the usage of those and also the connection between the two systems for those. And an audit can definitely help with that understanding and getting the organization on the same page between those systems. And then lastly, one of my key points in integration is going to be around the process. And a lot of times with process, I do encourage documentation, which is nobody's most fun point by any means, but we know that with integrations, they may potentially change over time. The system may grow, we may change usage within the system. So therefore, documenting the process, especially the frequency, that's always good to know, and how often we want to integrate. Is it going to be daily, weekly? And knowing, of course, too, what data is going to be integrating. There may be some filtering of data. We may not bring over all contact information for all records. So we may filter that as it exports back into another system or imports in from the other system. So documenting all of that so we can go back as the systems grow and change and understand what we are making changes to from our original decision and be able to easily make those are extremely important. So just some considerations for integration. And I think
Great.
we'll pass it over to Heller. Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah. Yes. So it is now time for some of your questions. So please go ahead and add questions to the questions box part of your webinar, and we've got some ready to go here. So question, a bidirectional question. How does the flow back to the source system, if it's in parentheses Salesforce, how does that work? In other words, how can we tell what's been updated in Raiser's Edge to send back to Salesforce? I think that one is probably a question for the Omatic team. If you're looking at Raiser's Edge data and something's been updated, how do you identify those updates?
This is Stu Manowith. From from the Razor's Edge standpoint, there are certainly tools within the Razor's Edge that you can use to determine if data has been changed. And I would, again, Salesforce is not my forte, but I assume that there are similar tools that you can use within Salesforce to see when data has been updated. If the question is more complicated than that, then maybe it needs to be rearticulated.
Sure. Yep. I think that I'm guessing that it's getting toward time stamping, date stamping of audit trails on certain fields, and certainly from a Salesforce standpoint, you can set up audit trail tracking, field level tracking on there that can be used then to query and pull the information over. So great. We've got a question here. Can we use just the Salesforce email campaigns? Is there an automated link with RE Query to create email lists in Salesforce? So I think I'm going to say in this one, is this a matter, I think this is probably a matter of trying to utilize, so just use it as a source system for populating campaigns in Salesforce. So here's an email list, bring it in and have those people set. Jennifer, what are your thoughts about doing that? So separate from a technical standpoint of getting the data over, what are your thoughts about what that would involve?
Sure. I think the majority of it would be using an RE query based on whichever criteria, whether it's giving information or volunteer information, or certain attributes or constituent codes, building that query in Razor's Edge and bringing the resulting contacts into Salesforce, or maybe updating them with a specific flag, like that they are opted into your newsletter or opted into receiving event communications, sort of whatever the purpose for that email list. And using that resulting list in Salesforce, you would basically just need a standing report that had that flag set to true and immediately adding those as campaign members in Salesforce. And once they're campaign members of a campaign, you can either use Salesforce mass email, or that can be connected to most of the email marketing tools that you might have hooked up on the Salesforce end, whether it's Marketing Cloud or Pardot or MailChimp or kind of any of a variety of tools on that side.
Great. Another question, can Salesforce be used to process donations and then import those donations into Razor's Edge? So I don't know if this is specific what this person is asking, but I could see a scenario where perhaps certain online donations or certain types of donations are being processed in one spot and other fundraising activities are being handled in Razor's Edge, and so sort of having Salesforce as the conduit there. Donation from the Omatic team, bringing donations back into Razor's Edge, what does that look like from an integration standpoint?
So I'll defer to Shane if I say something that is not needs to be clarified. But right now, our connector will bring in what in Razor's Edge is considered constituent information and gift information. And Shane, I don't think there's a limitation on the transactions that could come in from Salesforce, is there?
That's correct. On the bringing data from Salesforce to Razor's Edge, we're using a report-based approach. So anything that can be reported on in a tabular report can be pulled over to the Razor's Edge, and then using standard built-in IOM functionality can be mapped to any number of places within the Razor's Edge. So there's not a limitation there as long as you can report on it and get it out in a tabular report from Salesforce. That includes standard entities as well as custom entities, custom fields, etc.
I would just add that for that use case, I think the biggest challenge isn't getting the data to move across the systems. It's really just making the business process decisions to align the way that both tools track, like a donation or a transaction. So for example, if Razor's Edge needs a gift type, you want to make sure that Salesforce is tracking gift types as well so that that data can flow through accordingly.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And,
There's also built-in tools. Sorry, Stu. There's also built-in tools within
oh, go
IOM
ahead.
to allow you to basically translate the data. So that's a fair point, and you can piggyback on those functionalities. So if you have a value in Salesforce that may equate to a specific gift type or fund or whatever it may be, there are tools with dictionaries to be able to translate those values so that the two systems can be on equal playing ground with that.
Great. All right, we have a good one here. This is a really good use case that I think may be a good one for the panel for several of you on the panel to kind of chime in with your thoughts about this. My organization is interested in using Salesforce as a platform for other APIs to plug into our various businesses within the organization. We're an animal shelter, so businesses would be adoption training, education, boarding, etc. How does this work in conjunction with Razor's Edge, and does Razor's Edge then still remain our database of records? Currently, we use IOM to import constituent information from those other businesses into Razor's Edge, but it's just a one-way communication. So if we pull that apart a little bit, I would just say first that I think this is a lot of what people are thinking about doing with this possibility of integrating the two systems is exactly that kind of thing, utilizing Salesforce for some of the program management and delivery, mission delivery pieces, and using Razor's Edge for fundraising. So first, let's start with the question of, does Razor's Edge still remain our database of records? Who would like to?
I can take a first crack, but I'd also love to hear if there's additional comments. I think that when you're determining what is the database of record, it's actually okay for that to be different for different departments. So for the use case that you're describing, some of your program delivery departments, whether they're a training department or the shelter managers, whoever they might be doing 90% or more of their work in Salesforce all day, every day, whereas a fundraiser might be doing 90% or more of their work in Razor's Edge. And so it gets back to those questions that Sherry mentioned on her slide of really making decisions about what data will help the people from the other system do their jobs better and in a more efficient and informed way. And so you're not talking about moving all of the data points from one system to the other, because then you have two Razor's Edges and you have two Salesforces. You're really just duplicating everything, and that's more confusing rather than less. But if you decide these top 10 or top 20 data points are what's really going to make both departments use their system in the best way, each of them might have a different database of record, but with those key granules, those key tidbits that make them perform better.
Any other thoughts on that particular question?
Yeah, this is Stu. I will, from Omatic, I don't at all disagree with that. I would say that when we work with clients and that question comes up, and certainly there are organizations that have departmental systems, which are, you know, the most important system for that department. The system of record tends to be the master system of the organization, where the most accurate data, where the most complete data for every constituent record is. We work with a lot of clients where Razor's Edge is not the system of record; it is the fundraising system, and often data feed some big CRM. I have even worked with a Blackbaud CRM client where Blackbaud CRM was not the system of record as I just defined it. So I think it's going to be different for like the way that Razor's Edge and Salesforce are configured. It's going to be different for every organization. But to get back to the question that was asked, based on the scenario that you're presenting, I wouldn't see any reason why Razor's Edge could not remain your system of record if it is kind of the master system that most organizations, most organizational users go to if they want to know, get the most complete story or the most complete picture of their constituents.
Yeah. I've seen also, and again, this goes with the theme of there being different, each organization has its own specific way that this needs to be worked out. So another variation of this that I think it has its own drawbacks, but another variation is having constituent data, demographic data, for instance, always flow through one system and into the other one. And so it's a matter of business process and workflow of where that goes. But sometimes that depends on resource revamping or availability to make sure that if that's the way you go, the timing is worked out in such a way that it doesn't have a negative impact on people's work. So there's a number of different ways that question, I think, can kind of be resolved for each organization. Depends on what your resource availability is, and both your resources and the needs of particular programs, the degree of overlap that there is between the two, and the functions that you're looking to carry out. So very good question. And I think the other, this kind of question comes into play a little bit when you are considering those questions. This is kind of like the next step along the way, I guess, is in the integration, is there a way to review, is there a review step so that Raiser's Edge is not being updated blindly with not so great data entry from the Salesforce user side? Excellent question.
Hey, Sherry, do you want to talk a little bit about the how Import-O-Matic does that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually developed Import-O-Matic to be an interactive Import-O-Matic tool or import tool. Can't always so used to calling Import-O-Matic, but it is an interactive import tool, and you can actually set the activity that you want to see and how, actually, let me back up, set how interactive you want it to be. So we I think all came from backgrounds where we used the Raiser's Edge import tool, and we knew there was no, you kind of hit that import button and crossed your fingers and closed your eyes and hoped it all turned out okay. So we actually developed an Import-O-Matic, a way for our clients to be able to see as data comes in and trigger them to look at certain things. So it could be biographical updates, it could be address updates, it could be specific records. So if we wanted to look at just our board members that were being flagged as they come in, and we want to look at every single field that's coming in for them, there's a potential for us to look at the majority of the information as it imports in. So yes, there is definitely an opportunity for it to be interactive.
I'll also piggyback on that, that there's a lot of proactive steps an organization can make on the Salesforce end to make sure that users aren't entering bad data. So whether that's validation rules or duplicate rules to help enforce high quality data entry, but also since reports in Salesforce are what Import-O-Matic uses to pull the data in, you can also add report filters to make sure that you're only bringing in fields that meet certain criteria and only bringing in records that meet certain criteria. So there's definitely both proactive steps that you can take on the Salesforce end, and then as Sherry mentioned, kind of that review step or that interactive step on the Omatic end to make sure that you're not just feeding bad data back and forth, which doesn't really benefit anybody.
Exactly. Thank you. A couple of questions related to timing. So one, can these processes be automated and scheduled between Raiser's Edge and Salesforce? And then with kind of a follow-up to that, is there a frequency that works best with how often to send it back, or is there a time that's too short or a time that's too long to wait in between? So kind of the first question I think is pretty straightforward, and then I'd like to hear people just riff on that a little bit, what some of the considerations are for frequency.
So regarding automation, Omatic has a scheduler tool that will automate your import processing. The caveat with that is that we do not deploy that to Blackbaud hosting. So if you are hosted by Blackbaud, our scheduler is not unavailable. If you are hosted on premises or with a third party, then you can deploy our scheduler, and it will automate those processes for you.
Great.
I'll add one extra consideration for that, which is oftentimes I get clients who say that they want all integrations of everything in exactly real time for everything. And while that sounds really nice, that's not usually speaking about a specific business need coming from their users. And oftentimes trying to achieve that as the goal can either cost a lot in time, effort, resources, where something like a scheduled job that happens, whether it's hourly or nightly or whatever is appropriate for the data that's being moved, that's much easier to handle technologically speaking, because that way we can comply better with like Salesforce governor limits, things like that. And usually that's sufficient for getting staff the data that they need in a timely manner. And really the only consideration there is just training and communication, making sure that you're transparent and that your staff understand when the data will be updated and whether it's real time or not.
Excellent. All right. Here's another question. Is it possible to use your own configured Omatic profile internally to have the two systems exchange data?
Yeah, so even though that over the last few years, sorry, this is Sherry at Omatic, we have created several connectors to kind of build on top of Omatic. Our clients still have the ability to use Omatic and be able to import files. So we created those connectors so that it gave our clients the ability to have a little bit more hands-off and also to kind of set up more of a default environment for some of that data that's coming in and out and have a quick connectivity to them. So if you are going to be using your own profiles that you've utilized, there's still going to be more of a manual process of going in and pulling that data from whatever system it is that you're working with, pulling that data out, potentially, hopefully not much, but maybe change around that file a little bit to work with the profile you built out. Hopefully you've been able to keep as most hands-off as possible. But yes, it is absolutely possible to still do that. It's, again, not a requirement, but it makes life a lot easier to utilize the connectors.
Great. Here's a question. Why would there be a need to keep or maintain two separate databases with the capabilities housing the same information? So maybe somebody can say a little bit about which information is commonly shared across these things.
Well, this is Stu. I guess it depends on what you use each system for and what they're best at. So certainly Razor's Edge is top in its class for fundraising activity, and whether that's using it for direct marketing or using it for special events, fundraising events, or for membership systems that are fundraising based, like at museums or zoos, etc. Razor's Edge has a lot of really developed functionality, and if you have, like the example I gave before, if you've got prospects in Salesforce who are engaged with the organization from a programmatic standpoint, and you want to invite them to an event or send them a direct mail appeal or see if they want to be a member or a volunteer or anything like that, it would be useful to bring that data into Razor's Edge and manipulate it using Razor's Edge features. But every organization is different, and so I think that you've got to weigh out what you use the two systems for and whether there is merit in maintaining them separately or maintaining data in one over the other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I would add that I think.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I think that this approach really allows organizations to decide and to allow both Salesforce and Razor's Edge to play to their own strengths. And so, for example, people who've used Razor's Edge for a long time have probably taken for granted Razor's Edge's batch data entry tool for entering gifts en masse. It's really good and it does what people need, and so they barely even think about it. And then if they're coming into the Salesforce environment, they find that while there are batch gift entry tools, they might not meet the specific requirements that they had and that they were so used to having in Razor's Edge. On the flip side, Salesforce has really just burst the doors open in terms of the flexibility for program management. So whether you're doing policy and advocacy work, whether you're doing job and workforce development, whether you're doing animal welfare, whether you're a cause and cure organization that's delivering counseling or other services, you have utmost flexibility to build those processes and that data structure out in Salesforce with very few limitations. But when you're talking about something like who are my most engaged constituents, that might look different if you're in the fundraising database and you're looking at what does their giving history look like, versus being in Salesforce, your programs database, and you're either looking at who are my most active activists, or who are my most active volunteers, or who are the job trainers who are, they show up the most often. And so having that 360-degree view where maybe you bring some of the giving history summary info into Salesforce allows you to see that not only is this person a very engaged volunteer, but they're also a great prospect for major giving. And on the flip side, knowing that being able to bring in that this is your most engaged activist, even if they've had maybe a small giving footprint, and bringing that into RE allows you to really cross-pollinate your data in a way that allows both departments to do their work more effectively and engage deeper with their constituents. So we're definitely not trying to duplicate the work of either system, but again, it's all about just getting enough data that helps inform staff to do their jobs just a little bit better.
Well, and also exploiting each system for what it's best at. And so just to give you an example, we've had clients who call Salesforce their digital CRM for email marketing and website activity, and RE is their kind of back-end gift revenue financial system of record.
Exactly, and I think it's really is a good question, and also leads back to when we talked about picking out which information is most useful. And it can go from the most basic benefits of efficiency of just not having to update addresses, for instance, in both systems in a manual fashion, all the way to being able to utilize these insights to improve both your fundraising and your program engagement across the board and your constituent experience. So it's exciting that it's more accessible now. What should people anticipate? What should we anticipate from an administrative standpoint, from overseeing these integrations once they're in place? What kinds of things should people plan for? What activities do staff have to carry out when they're managing those?
Well, I would say from the Omatic standpoint, when we're handling multiple products, so there is going to be obviously some human interaction that needs to happen. One of the, I think, biggest things in integrating any systems is that, again, as I mentioned earlier, things do change over time. So dedicating the time to make sure that we have not only documented the integration that we're doing, because some of you may take off to the Bahamas and not come back. And if that does happen, we need to make sure that we can relay how these integrations are working between systems, how they've been set up, and the reasoning behind integrating those systems in those specific fields. So that definitely gives us the ability to potentially hand that off as needed. So it may be in the beginning, it may seem a little cumbersome to do those things because anyone finds that documenting all of that can be a bit overwhelming in the beginning. So that is definitely some of the upfront administrative tasks that would need to happen. With our connectors, we do like to, for the most part, get them set up and let them run on their own to where there is, again, very little interaction from the humans, and not saying no interaction because, again, there may be changes. So we may have to update import Omatic profiles. We may have to update things maybe within Salesforce. If there's a new field we want to track, you may have a custom field that needs to be developed, and Razor's Edge may need to be updated for that as well. So it may be also dependent on the frequency of how often your organization is changing with those systems. If you've had Razor's Edge for a very long period of time, there may not be a lot of change. If you're new into Salesforce, you may be still growing into that. So there may be change over time in how you're maybe utilizing it or particular custom fields. So I think it can vary with every organization, but there should be some dedicated resources to be able to handle that administrative time. But over time, I would say that it would be fairly minimal. In the beginning, it might be a little bit much for some people.
Yeah. And I'll add on to that, that with so many of this type of project or undertaking, actually the hardest part isn't the technical or administrative side. The hard part is just the decision making as an organization and deciding what data do we want to move, and in which direction, and which is our database of record, and how do we want to work. Those aren't always easy. Sometimes they are questions to answer, and it usually takes bringing a lot of staff, not just admin, into the room to sort of voice their opinions as stakeholders and as the ones who are actually doing the work and using the systems. And to piggyback on what Sherry was saying, documentation is always key, and you want to make sure that it's communicated out to staff so that they know what to expect from the behavior of both systems. And a lot of it is just kind of general maintenance, and that might be as simple as making sure that the Salesforce report that's feeding into Razor's Edge stays up to date if your business processes change. So that might be as simple as tweaking a report filter periodically, or it might be a little bit more complex, like creating a brand new report to feed into through import Omatic into Razor's Edge, which might need a custom report type in Salesforce. But the decision making is really the hardest part because it often requires bringing a bunch of people together and making sure that kind of having everyone voice a reason or a justification, like a business case for having the data integrate. But once you have that and get the buy-in, the administration of this tool and of this connection is actually simpler than not.
And I would go so far as to add that both the Heller team and the Omatic team, if needed, could help you with that business process reengineering if that's something that you need.
Definitely agreed.
Absolutely. What would, and maybe two or three of you can answer if you've got, what do you think is the biggest mistake? Name one mistake that people make when they're planning integrations or overseeing them or related to integration.
Well, I think one of the biggest things that I've found over time in working with several clients and migrating systems and integrating systems is that I have seen clients take it completely on their own. And whereas I don't ever want to say that my clients couldn't handle that, it's more having a professional come in and assist through that process can mean the world of difference, and just having another opinion, having another person there. Working within our organizations, we have lots of personalities, lots of people to deal with, so having that one person that can kind of help herd the sheep a little bit, or the cats, maybe we'll look at it that way, and it can help in bringing them together and help keep you on track and help keep you on schedule. So we've had several clients who have embarked on some of these on their own, and they found that they run into roadblocks just having simple conversations with other people in their organization. Once we're pulled in, we're able to get through those a little bit more successfully, a little bit quicker as well.
Right.
We've already talked about it. Oh, I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
I guess it's a similar answer to Sherry's, but I would definitely say that the planning is the hardest part. As I mentioned, there's a lot of just decision making that needs to be done, and the more that you can do that at the beginning rather than when you're kind of in the weeds and you lose sight of what our end goal is, will just make things easier for everyone involved. And that's really, again, to her point, a good reason to bring in external help, especially if you're not an organization who has a lot of internal resources that can devote a good chunk of their time to just this project. Because we know that you all have your regular jobs, they're usually 9 to 5 or beyond, and adding new technology projects into the mix can be really challenging for staff. So in deciding on who internally is going to be engaged in the decision making and in testing is really big, and so making the space for them to do that and to allow them to get feedback from the key stakeholders throughout the project is really a way to ensure success.
The only thing I was going to add before was, and we alluded to it a little earlier, is clients who want everything in both systems, because I think one of the participants said, well, then or one of the panelists said, if you have everything in both systems, why do you need both systems? So I think it's like trying to boil the ocean. Think about really which data need to live in the system that in its source system, and which data truly are going to be beneficial and have merit being integrated with the other system. It should never be. It should never be all of it. I would say all of it is always the wrong answer.
Right. Exactly. And I would just add, at a very tactical level, I would throw in there that I think not just keeping an eye on it from those things that we talked about before, that your needs will change. So just remembering to kind of keep an eye on it, build it, make it regular part of your systems to keep the integration in mind, so that you don't get too far out down the road without having everything accounted for. And so, thank you all, panelists. This is really great. I appreciate your participation and the thought that went into this, and thank you all for attending. We're just about at time here. If we did not get to your question, we'll definitely reach out to you. We've got it as part of your webinar registration, and we'll definitely reach out to you and follow up offline. And I just want to close by saying, Omatic, we've got some contact information there if you want to look into the services and tools they provide, either via connectors that import Omatic or system audits and development of these integration projects. And we also offer assessments, and in thinking about how you want to incorporate this integration, asking some of those big picture questions and aligning them to your key strategies as well. So please reach out and contact us if you're interested in thinking more about integrating these two systems. Thank you very much. Everybody have a good day.
Thank you.